I'm particularly interested in auditory hallucinations and delusions, sort of the psychotic symptoms, the main cardinal symptoms of psychosis. And I spend a lot of my time thinking about how to study that. The reason people have psychotic experiences is because they have trouble differentiating between ideas and thoughts that are coming from self and voices and experiences that are coming from outside of self. So I've been testing a mechanism that, if it's broken, would confuse a person about whether the experience is self-generated or coming from outside. So in the situation with hearing voices, people think that they're hearing voices from somebody in the room or someone behind them, and there's no one else in the room. So they are having this very aberrant experience. With Dan Mathalon, we run the Brain Imaging and EEG Laboratory, Beagle, BIEEGL. We do MRI, mostly functional MRI. We do EEG-based studies, and we also do studies where we combine the two imaging modalities. So we put people in the scanner with EEG electrodes on so that we can try to get some understanding of the temporal and spatial dimensions of how the brain is misworking in schizophrenia, mostly. In college, I got involved in doing human learning research. So how do people learn things? What kinds of words do they forget? So I found that reasonably interesting. In 1969, 1970, I went to UC Berkeley to get a PhD in psychology. And scholars of the 60s and 70s would know that was when UC Berkeley shut down because of the Vietnam War and the demonstrations. And I began to feel like the work I was doing was pretty irrelevant. I saw no immediate application for what I was doing. So I actually took a leave of absence. I got a job in a psychiatry department at Stanford. So I got a job as a research assistant, and it was doing EEG research. And I found it in schizophrenia. And I found it so fascinating. I found the technique actually fascinating, recording the EEG and doing the evoked potentials and doing the analysis. This was, of course, before computers. So it was a lot of tedious, but very up close and personal work. And I found the method exciting. I found the idea that I was actually working in a mental hospital relevant and possibly important. And so that's really how I got into psychiatry. It wasn't I'm going to go do psychiatry. It was, I'm going to go do something important. At the time, most of the people in the neuroscience program were doing like counting cells. This was before brain imaging had been born. So they were much more basic science. And I would say that there wasn't a lot of respect for EEG and event-related potentials, which were at that point called evoked potentials. The field has changed a lot with the advent of fMRI, functional brain imaging, because I think people understand the limitations of fMRI. You can tell where in the brain something is happening, but you can't tell when it happened. EEG gives you temporal information. And I think people realized that and started using EEG-based methods to give themselves some temporal information. EEG resolves on a millisecond time basis, so it responds as fast as the neurons respond themselves. The problem with EEG is that you're on the scalp and you're far away from the actual activity. But a lot has happened in the field. It's become sort of a much more popular tool. Back about 20 years ago, I decided I wanted to study how the brain processes the sensations that the person is doing, him or herself. And so I started doing vocalization studies. So I had people vocalize, and I recorded the EEG response from the brain as they vocalized. And then I play back the sounds and look at how the brain responds when it's passive versus when the person is actually talking. And I suppose one of the highlights is that it worked. And this was in spite of everything that I'd been told about why it wouldn't work. EEG is very sensitive to to throat movements, tongue movements, jaw movements, everything muscular. And I remember talking to an old-time colleague. I told him I was doing this, and he says, well, it's never going to work. You can't record EEG when people are talking. It's impossible. So, okay, but I persisted, and it works. It is noisy, and we've had to develop some algorithms to make the data clean, but the data look good. And I've been doing it for almost 20 years now, and other people are beginning to do it. So I'd say that was a highlight. I didn't listen to this guy saying you can't do it, I just did it. The thing I enjoy, I'd say, most about my job is analyzing data and having a question to ask the data and trying to understand what the data are trying to tell me and trying to put it all together. I find that very exciting, and it's empowering because it's just me and the data. And I like writing papers. I like interacting with the data. And I've never understood how some people will have a statistician analyze their data, and then the statistician gives them the data, and then they write a paper, because for me, it's a very interactive, iterative process. But I spend most of my job doing other things. Reviewing grant proposals, and reviewing papers, editing papers that other people have written, writing letters. But I do try to find time to dig into the data, because that's really fun. A simple answer for me about whether being a woman interrupted my career or made it difficult to do what I do, I would say no. What really made it difficult was that there was a real bias when I was at Stanford against people in psychiatry with just a PhD. You needed to have an MD, and getting on the faculty at Stanford with a PhD was very difficult. I was lucky that a colleague joined our lab, and she wanted to be on the faculty, and she forged the way. I was sort of like, oh, whatever, it's okay. I just like doing the work. It didn't really matter. But she actually really took this on, and she got on the faculty, and we both got on the faculty. And it was because she pushed for it. I was willing to not push for it, but I'm really glad that she was there and made all the difference. I went to Yale in 2004 and was very surprised to see how many PhDs were on the faculty. And it was quite heartening. And I realized that I'd had a rather perhaps aberrant experience before that. I didn't have any women advocates when I was younger. I was surrounded by men pretty much entirely. I mean, I think it's much better now. We are actively encouraging young women. We recruit women. We want to get women speakers. We want women to win prizes. We are thinking about that all the time. When I was in graduate school, there were very few women in the field. There were very few women in the neurosciences department. There was one woman, and I actually had her on my dissertation committee. Marion Smith was her name. But there weren't any women in the lab. There were no women mentors around. And I think I would have benefited a great deal if I had had somebody around to talk to about things that were going on. I did have women colleagues from around the country, and I got to know a number of women in the field that way. And that I thought was very helpful and supportive. But back then we weren't really talking about what was going on. That was long before I think we were really aware and really were comfortable talking about things that might have made us uncomfortable in a male-dominated lab or department. I think since the Me Too movement started, women are now talking to each other about, the whole Brett Kavanaugh hearing and Christine Blasey Ford and her testimony. I mean, all of us said, yeah, of course. That didn't actually happen to me, but it sure could have, and things like that. And so we started talking, and we started saying, and but here's what happened to me. Stuff that I haven't really talked about or thought about for many years, but now I'm talking about it, and it's sort of validating. It's good to just exchange and support each other, exchange experiences and support each other. It's empowering to be able to talk to a woman and say, yeah, that happened to me too. And I still haven't gotten over it, that kind of thing. Now in our lab, I've got 2 women in our lab who are on the faculty. And it's great. We don't just talk about, bad things that have happened to us, but we just have different kinds of conversations. And I enjoy that. It's a very good thing. It's really important to network and to have women in your network and men. One thing about SOBP that I think is a really valuable organization. If you're a member, then you can start being on committees. And once you're on a committee, that's a really great way to network, because then you're meeting people from other institutions. It's not just you and your lab. You're meeting people from all around the country and even around the world, and you work together. And if you enjoy that work, then you sort of rise in the committee. And pretty soon, maybe you'll be co-chair of the committee, and then you'll be chair. And then it's just, the sky's the limit for, young people coming up through the ranks of, PhD, postdoc, young faculty. You need a lot of support. You need letter writers. You need to network with some slightly older people as well, but you need to have your cohort of friends and family that are going to be supporting you all along. One thing I've noticed in my service on appointments and promotions committees is how important it is for young people early in their faculty careers to individuate from their mentors, to start kind of carving out their own domain of research. I know a lot of science is team science these days, but I think it's important to find something, a niche that is you, that is not your mentor. Try to stop publishing with your mentor. Try to stand on your own. It's important to get out there, really important to present your work. On a lot of appointments and promotions committees and reviews, they tend to do less putting themselves out there, like going to meetings, giving talks, presenting, getting invited to other labs to give talks. There seems to be less of that on their CVs, and that sort of stands in their way of promotion. So you've got to self-promote. You've got to put yourself out there.